Hi, it's so nice to meet you.
You too. I'm really happy to meet you.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. Thanks for inviting me to be on. It's an honor.
it's my pleasure, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time to do this. I'll try not to eat up your whole day. Here's the thing. When I in when I know about you because of your book, and I found like a list. I don't even remember whose list it was. Someone had recommended a list of books written by vegan authors and people who are activists for plant-based stuff. And it was by reading your book that I realized all the other amazing stuff that you're up to. So,
Thank you. That's so sweet, and I love that. That's really that's so nice to hear. Thank you.
um, so first, just to let you know, I'm not in a studio of any kind. I actually broke my ankle, so I'm in my living room. And so first, I apologize if like a dog starts jumping on me or we have a
Okay,
weird.
I might have a dog jump on me too, just FYI. And I'm so sorry about your ankle. That sounds horrible.
It's been weeks now. I'm just like, I took a couple of weeks of like, I guess I can't do anything. And then after a couple of weeks, I was like, no, I need my life back. So, so
Yeah,
I'm just adjusting and stuff. But
yeah.
yeah. So yeah. So do you mind? I know that there's so many other things going on in your life, but do you mind if we just start by touching on the book first, since that
Yeah,
was my
absolutely. I'm
first.
anything you want to talk about.
Okay, great. So always too much and never enough. I won't go too far into it because honestly, I think it would take 5 hours to ask you everything I want to ask you about it. But I I I got the book, like I said, because I heard that it was written by somebody who was vegan. So I started the book, and in the beginning, I mean, I know you were vegan when you wrote it, but the book actually starts way before that, which
Mhm.
is really cool. And there's like a lot unpacked just about. Sorry, I'm just jumping right in. Is that
No,
stressful?
no, not at all. I love it.
Okay.
I'm a jumper inner myself.
Okay,
Go
good.
big.
So yeah, there's a lot unpacked about body image and super relatable. We had very different beginnings in life, family beginnings, but we also have a lot of similarities, a lot of like the multiple parents, the aspirations to be on Broadway, like, there was a lot of similarities. And one of them for sure is I also had a stepmother who was really big on Weight Watchers. And I remember going with her. I don't know. I think I think I'm probably about 10 or 15 years older than you. So there was like some changes probably in between our
How old are
experiences.
you?
I'm 53.
Oh, okay. I'm just about 44.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so I don't know if when your mom was doing this, if this was a thing, but when my stepmom was doing it, there was like a part of Weight Watchers where there was a special soup that had like 0 points and you could eat as much of it as you wanted.
Oh yeah, I know all about the green soup. I actually have a clear memory of making that once when I was about 24 and I was living in New York City and I was dating someone who came over. We were just starting to date and she was looking at the soup and was like just shaking her head like no. And I think that was the moment we realized it wasn't going to work.
I just remember my stepmother being like, "This is great because you can eat as much of it as you want." And I was like, "But
Wow.
why would I want to do that?
This.
Why
Yeah,
would I want that?"
right.
So, yeah.
100%.
And me too. I was like, at the time, looking back, I think I maybe, not that this matters, because honestly, I was like 14 years old, but I think I weighed about 114 pounds. Like I was a tiny person, and I will never be that tiny ever again in my life. And even then, I don't even think it was about weight. I just think she assumed that as a woman in that
Right.
era that this would be important to me to
Totally.
manage my weight with her. Like this was our
Right.
bonding thing. So yeah, so there was that. But then I was wondering, because then a lot goes on, and then so we already grew up with this as like as women, and then depending on the family you grow up in and your environment, but like just in society, you grew up with this expectation to have a certain, you know, shape and size and weight and everything. But then what I was curious about, because then you do become vegan, and
Mm-hmm.
when that happened for you, did that, like when you started to identify as vegan, then did that, at that point, was that already a stereotype that like all vegans were super tiny,
Mm-hmm.
and did that put extra pressure on you then as well?
Well, not initially, but I think maybe early on in my veganism it did, but I actually went vegan because of ethical reasons.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of people come to veganism for health reasons, as you know, and maybe some of them shift over to ethical reasons, which is great when that happens. I went vegan because of ethics, and then I learned about all of the vegan food in New York City where I lived, and so it definitely wasn't tied into, you know, this sort of ideal of health or size. I think that I had a lot of work to do in confronting my internalized fat phobia, which was a very long process that took, you know, I don't even know how long, well over a decade. Probably will always be happening to some extent since we're always shifting, both physically and emotionally. But no, when I first went vegan, I thought it was my moral obligation to try every single piece of fried food in New York City. Like, I knew the subway map as a web of how to get me from like the soft serve in Williamsburg to the polenta fries on the Upper East Side and so forth. Yeah.
Amazing. When I know when I first became vegetarian, it was like the 80s, late 80s, and we, okay, now the cat's gonna scream. It was the late 80s, and I didn't know anyone else who was vegetarian at the time, so I just there, and I lived in a small city, and I didn't even know where to find any vegan food or vegetarian specific food. And then in the late 90s, I'm in Canada, so I moved to Montreal. And even then, it was so hard to find like even tofu in a
Mm,
grocery store. You had to go to a health
yeah.
food store to find, just to get tofu or soy milk or something like that. And I'm not bashing my city. I love it. There's lots of great vegan food here and stuff, but I just
Mhm.
remember going to New York years ago and being so excited.
Yeah.
I was like, they have food here that I can eat. Like even in the little bodegas, like the little corner stores and stuff, they
Mhm.
had vegan takeaway options and stuff. So that yeah, that was really exciting. I was just like, this is the best place to be vegan.
Yeah.
There's so much food. It's great.
Although now small cities are like overflowing with vegan food. I lived in New York City for 20 years and then I moved to Los Angeles, but I live in Rochester, New York now.
Okay.
And this is probably one of the best small cities in the US for vegans. I actually wrote about that. I wrote a story about that for VegNews and it went viral because I think people are constantly looking up, you know, where they could be without being in the big city. And you're right, back in the day it was definitely just the big cities, but even then we didn't have good cheese. I mean, for anyone listening to this who is just coming into the world of veganism now, we took one for the team, y'all. Like, it tasted like cardboard at best, and sometimes it looked like cheese and smelled like cheese, and we would get excited and then we would take a bite and spit it out. Like, that's how bad it was. And
Yeah.
now you've got all the cheese that you need as a vegan.
I actually did an episode not like in the last season about cheese, and telling listeners like you won't find the exact same cheese, and it took me forever to find cheese that actually, but yeah, you can even get feta cheese, goat cheese, like, you know, pretend
Anything.
goat cheese and all kinds of stuff now. It's crazy. Um and fun because yeah, before I would, if somebody would I don't know, if I was trying to show them like, look, you can eat just as tasty, they'd be like, give me cheese. And I'm like, not that.
Right, right. Anything else but that. Now
Yeah.
we've got that too. I was vegetarian for years before I was vegan, and I went vegetarian at like 19, and then I went vegan at 24. And in that time, I think all I ate were animal products, like mostly cheese and eggs, obviously. But it wasn't like the occasional cheese or eggs. It was constant, like
Yeah.
constant, constant.
Yeah.
And I think more people are going right to veganism now than in our day,
Yeah.
but it was definitely, speaking of ethics, now that I look back, I was probably eating less ethically as a vegetarian than I had been as a meat eater.
Yeah, I think about that too. So I have 3 daughters. They're adults now, but I raised them vegetarian, and I look back at the amount of eggs and cheese and ice cream, milk, like all of it, yogurt, that I just
Hmm.
packed them full of to compensate for or what I felt was compensating for the lack of meat products. And yeah, it's crazy. And none of my daughters are vegan now, but 2 of them are vegetarian. And one of them called me the other day, and she was like, I just went to eat an egg, and I just was staring at it, and I just really realized what it was. And
Hmm.
I felt so grossed out. Is that normal, or is there something wrong with me? And I was like, you're talking to the wrong person.
That's or actually the right person. And I think a lot of people who identify as vegetarian now, I mean, I'm making a huge sweeping generalization right now, but I do think, anecdotally speaking, the ones that I know are mostly vegan at this point. Where because there's options everywhere. Whereas when I was a vegetarian, there were no alternatives that
Yeah.
were decent.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, so and to go back to, so the reason why I was asking you too about after so you grew up with all, struggling, sometimes not, but like always having this sort of undercurrent of importance being placed on weight and what you were eating. But at the same time, you were saying like a lot of the food in your house was not really health conscious. Like it was more about the physical
Right.
not even physical, honestly, but just like a visual, the aesthetic of whether or not, of what your size was and stuff. But that actually the food in your house was not that
Right.
healthy. And then when you became vegan, really just being like, oh, amazing. There's so many
Yeah.
incredible foods. Like you said, the desserts and all the incredible vegan
Yeah.
foods and stuff. Was it was it because you went through that period? I don't know if you're still juicing ever. I know you went like on juice detoxes and stuff like that, where you were really having to, for the first time, ingest a ton of fruits and vegetables.
Hmm.
Is that when you started to notice the kinds of food you were putting in your body, or was it before that? Or
That's a really great question. And it's funny, I do want to say, I wrote the book 9 years ago. So it came out in 2016, but I wrote it in 2014. And so yeah, 9 years ago. I mean, really a lot has changed since then. It's super weird to have a memoir. And I remember when I was writing it, the New York Times had an article that was like, you shouldn't write a memoir if you're under 40. And I was at the time under 40, and I thought it was so funny. But anyway, so to answer your question from this perspective, not
yeah,
the perspective of the person who, you know, you met at the end of the book, but it is an excellent question. I would say when I went vegan, it really shifted for the first time the way I looked at food. It was suddenly no longer about me. It was about everyone else. And that shift was colossal because previously, and you alluded to this with your own upbringing, but I also had I call her TM in the book, Thin Mom. My mom has always been very much the American standard of beauty, very thin, very like kind of traditionally beautiful. I have never been either of those things. And And so I had this sort of TM who was very self-conscious and kind of pushing it onto me, even when she didn't fully realize that, bringing me into weight loss programs with her, kind of tricking me to go to them in a
Mhm.
few, things like that. I'm sure you can relate. And so growing up and getting out of the house and then, being a young adult, it was still always about me. Like, will this make me look like XYZ? Again, I hadn't even heard the word fat phobia yet. So,
Mhm.
let alone start to address it in myself, which I'm not even sure I did until after my memoir came out, to be honest. But so when I first went vegan and I was eating like only processed foods, which I don't actually think there's anything wrong with like eating the vegan version of traditional standard American fare, but I never ate a vegetable, as I talk about in the book, not until I was 30. And I was having a lot of health problems that most 30-year-olds or many 30-year-olds do not have yet. And I
Mhm.
say yet because the standard American diet is setting most people up to have those problems. Some of the top contributors to death, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancer, heart disease, these are for a large part addressable. I mean, not all of them, but I was just like doing my thing. And so when I was 30 and in my early 30s, that was when I was able to blend, so to speak, or juice, I guess you could say, the idea that food wasn't about me and my vanity. It
Yeah.
was about the animals. But I was able to blend that with the fact that I am also an animal and I need to take better care of myself.
Yeah. Amazing. It's so complicated, our relationships with food, and we're all so incredibly different one from another. I know when I was a teenager, I just want to say there's a part in your book where you write about a time in your life where you were away for work and you weren't eating at all.
Yeah,
And as a nutritionist and as the mother of 3 young women, I that killed me. I'm so
totally.
I'm so happy that the book doesn't end there because I was like,
Yeah, it's
"Oh
a
my
really
god."
hard part. Yeah. And now that I'm the age of someone, I don't have human children, I have animal children. But if I did, I could have a child the age that I was. And
Yes,
since we are all sort of reparenting ourselves always, it sort of breaks my heart too, in a way it didn't used to think about that really painful time and like, why wasn't there proper intervention?
yes.
So I feel you. I totally feel you.
I think that, well, it's really interesting too because I have friends who I cannot relate to who have no interest in food at all, just don't care. Like I have one friend who literally said, if I could just take a pill instead of eating, I would. That's how interested I am in food, which is like so beyond my ability to conceptualize because I'm the up. If I could spend the whole day cooking and eating, I
Mhm.
would. Um, but I do remember when I was younger, I also went through phases of like not eating. For me, it was not there were some things that you wrote about that are very relatable. I don't want to say too much because I want people to read it for themselves, but I know for myself that not eating, yes, it came from a place of feeling like, oh, okay, well, I need to be skinny, but what kept it going for a while was I realized I had this control that I didn't know I had. And I kind of was getting high on the fact that I was able to control my own body and that no one else had anything like that was just
Right.
mine.
Yep,
And
absolutely. That sounds like true anorexic thinking in my non-professional opinion, but that like it's all about control, and especially in a world where we feel like we don't have any, having control over ourselves
yeah,
can really mix together with like a toxic mindset that is instilled in us early on. But
yeah,
on the flip side of that, right, that is the fact that in a world where we don't have control over a lot of things, we actually do have control over how we vote with our dollars and what we're consuming in terms of both media and food and other, other things as
mhm,
well. So I find that quite empowering. But yeah, for younger people especially, it can get really messed up with those toxic parts of us.
for sure. And you don't realize later you'll feel it doesn't need to be about control at all, and it shouldn't be, but later on you get to learn that you do have control over your body and over yourself, and what you put into your body. Only you can do that in a really beautiful,
Yeah.
healthy, nurturing, self-loving way, instead of depriving yourself and being like, look how strong I am, I'm depriving myself.
Right.
So yeah, I yeah, anyway, I found it really interesting, the whole evolution that was just your relationship with food, and also just how I love how you write about it in such, I don't know how to word it, even just in a in such an honest way, but like such an accessible, relatable way too. I think that a lot of people, and I think it's amazing and wonderful that anyone writes or talks openly about their experience that they have with food addiction or eating disorders. But there was something about the way you wrote it that was so, there's like no shame in
Mm.
it, like that you just owned it, like this is what I was going through. And it's not, I don't know, some people write about it and it's like this dark looming thing in the past that they can't embrace and accept as like, yeah, this was me, this was part of my journey, this is
Mm-hmm.
my life. And I just think that there was something so beautiful about the way you wrote about it. Like it wasn't like a like a thing, an isolated, ugly thing sitting there all by itself that you
Well,
were
that's
breaking up
very,
with.
that's really kind, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. And I will say that I mentioned earlier, it's strange to have a memoir out there, but I will say if this became clear when I was on the book tour more so than when I was writing the book, but so many people would go up to me. I went on a 65 city book tour after the book came out, and so many people at every single event would go up to me and say, this is my story in one way or another, kind of like how you just said it. I mean, it's like, yeah, there's differences, but ultimately we were living such a similar experience, feeling very alone in it, not recognizing that there are like gazillions of paths directly next to us in each way, full of people, mostly women, and I'm sure also non-binary people who are going through a very similar lived experience. So when I went and would read from my book, I was understanding that the listener was taking it in as their experience, not as mine. So
Mm.
it was a way that I was able to separate myself from, everything, from the fact that it's super weird to be telling like these big personal things in front of, like, in some cases, like a stadium, not a stadium, my God, like a theater full of people, not a stadium yet, maybe my next book. Uh, but it's our story, and I'm telling it. I'm the vessel through which some of my readers are able to explore their own, identity and issues.
um Before, you don't have to answer this, but you've alluded to it twice already just in this conversation, and I saw you post a comment about it on social media not that long ago. um so before I ask you stuff about animal activism,
Yeah.
just a last thing about the book. You posted recently on social media that you were holding up the book. I think it was an anniversary of however many years since the book went out, and you said that you felt like you were, like it was the book of somebody else, sort of, because it's not your current
Mm.
reality. But what did you mean exactly? I don't want to put words into it.
So as far as I recall, that post was a couple years ago, or almost a couple years ago. The post we're talking about, I think it was in this coming February. It it will have come out. I can't do math, like, a long time ago. And so I didn't say that recently. And the reason I'm clarifying that is because I see it differently now. Of course it was me. It is weird. I was married to a different person at the end of it. I was living in Brooklyn. I had there's similarities to my career now. I still do Our Hen House with Mariann, and I'm still a writer, but there are so many different things going on. It's like a different set of cast of characters, a different setting. And that part of it is weird. But like, of course it's me. It's just not necessarily representative of my current mindset or my current worldview. Like, you know, I see now, I mean, the book came about after I wrote an article that went viral about how the world treated me when I was fat. And then when I lost nearly 100 pounds, the world started treating me very differently. Like men would hold doors for me, neighbors who never said hello would start saying hello, like things like that. I was suddenly visible as opposed to invisible. And it took me losing that weight to really understand that. The layer that I don't think I fully understood at the time the book came out, which I now understand, is that writing the book itself was thin privilege. And that's, you know, it's problematic in a way, but at the same time, like, at least now I'm a woman over 40 without children who's like an atheist Jewish lesbian. You know, I understand that my voice is one that is frequently like sort of pushed down, and so I've stopped the process of kind of beating myself up over having a book that talks partly about a weight loss journey. It's really not about a weight loss journey, but because that's part of it, that's what the editors, the publishers put on the back of the jacket. There was a period of time, I'm throwing a lot at you right now, Jennifer, but like there was a period of time after the book came out that I gained the weight back and then I lost it again. And that's where I am now. And that's just what my journey is. I mean, I'm a person who goes up and down in weight, and I like drastically, really. And you know, right now I feel very comfortable in who I am as far as like being healthy, being able to be a runner, which I wasn't able to personally be a runner when I was heavier, but a lot of heavier people can run and do run. So I think that there are just a lot of nuances that exist for me now that didn't at the time.
But can I ask you, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
No, you don't. I'll answer whatever you want. I can't think of one thing that I wouldn't answer, literally.
Because you said that you lost the weight, you gained it back, you lost weight again, like that your weight fluctuates. And so I'm curious, because even as a nutritionist who just make it about me for 1 minute, just before COVID, I busted my knee up. That was a really long, it's not a full recovery. I just have no cartilage left in my knee, but it's not acute anymore. But I was walking with a cane. I could barely do anything. I was really active before. I was running, I was boxing, but my weight has always fluctuated in life. But as a nutritionist who suddenly started putting on pounds over COVID, putting on pounds because I couldn't walk or exercise anymore, I started to get better. Then I slipped a disc in my back. Now I have a broken ankle. Like,
my God,
it's just crazy.
We have to like put you in one place and like,
I know, just bubble wrap me.
Right.
But there was definitely a time where I was even nervous, like nervous to see clients live, because I felt like, oh, they're going to see me and be like, well, how is she going to help me be healthy when she's like 20 pounds overweight, 30 pounds overweight? Like how? And I remember saying to my girlfriend, like, because at COVID, we started doing things on Zoom, virtual stuff. And I remember telling her, like, I'm nervous now to see my clients live because I've gained weight. And she was like, what are you talking about? I said, because they're going to see now that I'm overweight. And I feel like I have to tell them, like, I know I'm overweight, but I busted my knee. Like, I even caught myself not excusing myself exactly, not saying, I'm sorry, I'm fat, I've hurt my knee, but slipping the injury into the conversation as like a little, like, make sure they had the message that it's not that I don't know what I'm doing. And my partner was like, gaining weight doesn't make you have less knowledge to share. You're being really weird. Like, she couldn't relate. So she was just like, why wouldn't you see a client just because you weigh more than you did last time you saw them? So all this is to say, like, how did that feel weird to have put out the book, like you said, with thin privilege, and then to put weight back on? Did you feel nervous about that?
Well, first of all, let me just acknowledge and appreciate your sharing that, because I think that that was a vulnerable thing to share, and also something that I'm really glad you did, because I think it could normalize a lot of people's thoughts. And clearly the for lack of a better word, the patriarchy has done quite a number on us, because there was a lot of internalized fat phobia for you to examine in that story at that time, because your stepmother's voice was what was telling you that. Her parents' voice was what told her that. Her parents' voice is, and on and on and on. We have inherited this, and it's up to us to sort of stop it in its tracks. There's nothing wrong with being fat, nothing. And I never said there was in my book, but I think that there is just a very strong implication in it, that is something that I feel uncomfortable about, but I'm also fine with it, because we're writers, and that's what happens when you're a writer. You put things out there, and then you evolve your thinking. To your question, 1 billion%, 1 billion%, especially when I would get asked to speak at maybe colleges or whatnot, and I would feel like, I'm not physically looking like the same person. People kind of understand that a memoir is a slice in time, but they also, I think, subconsciously just expect that that's the person who's going to show up in front of them.
Mhm.
And so what I did was I started to write another book. I wrote a book proposal for a book that never sold. It was called What I Gained. And of course, I think part of the reason it didn't sell is because that's not what publishers are looking for.
Yeah.
There are a variety of other reasons that it didn't sell. But what I wanted to write about was being comfortable in middle age with turning the lights on during sex, with like being in a body that I happen to have a wife who, like as many lesbians do, just like worships my body at any size. But that book didn't sell. And yeah, of course I felt uncomfortable about that. And I would kind of get over myself. And just like in your story, I can see it. You might not be able to because you're too close to it. But I would say there would be something really, really meaningful and powerful about going to a nutritionist and having them be, a larger size than you thought. I would personally feel so much more comfortable with that experience than if I was like walking in and there was like some super skinny nutritionist there. I'd be like, oh, I'm screwed.
I think, but I think that's what my girlfriend pointed out to me, even at the time. Like, how would you, if you walked into a nutritionist office and other you was sitting there, would you be like, oh, she's too fat, she can't help me? Like, is that
Right.
how you would feel? And I was like,
That's
no, I'd feel like I was
wow.
talking to a person who could
Yeah.
understand how I felt. Like, and yeah, you're right. If I walked in and Barbie was sitting there and she was like insanely
Right.
unattainable, not her as a person, but
Right.
like, if
Yeah.
that felt unattainable to me, I would feel immediately like, I don't know if this person's going to understand where I'm coming from at all. She's going to tell me to eat celery and this is not going to be fun, so
There's
yeah.
them voices. I recommend the book to anyone listening to this. I recommend the book What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. And it's not a vegan book, but it really unpacks the internalized fat phobia to a large degree, so to speak. And it's a really meaningful book, especially for me, as I've been undoing some really terrible, crossed wires inside of me about what it means to show up in the world as as myself with all of my privileges,
Mm-hmm.
from my my race to my able-bodiedness, to the fact that I was born into the place I was born into, also in middle class, like not having to really work, like all of the privileges.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of them that I really had to examine,
Mm.
and I really recommend people do.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out for sure. Okay, so you went from becoming vegan, well, vegetarian, becoming vegan, to and vegan for the animals, and at least in the beginning, and then becoming an activist to actually organizing a New York City walk for farm animals that was attended by like thousands of people, and you had kiosks and organizations and all kinds of tons of volunteers and stuff. How did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah, and that was when I was working for Farm Sanctuary, as that was like in 2007, I think. I was a trained actor as a child and as a young adult. That's what I studied. I went to a conservatory for acting, and I was trying to act in my early 20s in New York City. So I would do like off Broadway shows, and it was very hard to cast me. I was not easily castable, which, put an asterisk on that because I'm going to get back to that in a second. But when I learned, I was in a theater company, and through the theater company, I met someone's friend, like one of my co-actors' friends, who was vegan. She had just gone vegan herself. And I went to a screening of hers, of a movie, documentary. And like the second I learned what was happening to dairy cows and egg laying hens, it was like I had never thought about that before. And I saw so many similarities between so many of the issues that I already was standing up for, like feminism and LGBTQ issues. And I just could not unsee that when I was looking at the exploitation of these, female bodies, to use a binary for a moment. And so I not only went vegan, but you don't see that and like not question your life. So that's when I got involved with activism. And I'm like an all-in type of person. When I do something, I don't really putter around with it. So I had a friend at the time, the late Mary Max, Peter Max's widow, the artist Peter Max. And she sent me down to PETA in Norfolk, Virginia. And, the rest is history. I just was like, okay, this is my world now. And I started working in animal activism. It's changed a lot, but, I wouldn't say I necessarily work in animal activism now, but I do host a show that elevates those who do, but I'm sort of adjacent to it. And I incorporate it into my media making, in whether it's at WXXI, which is the NPR station here where I'm a host, or it's like in some of the freelance writing I'm doing. It's in it all the time, but I don't like do that type of organizing anymore. For a while, it was my heartbeat, though.
Can you talk a bit about Our Hen House?
Sure. So, Our Hen House is a media nonprofit that Mariann Sullivan and I co-founded in 2010. And it was after I was working at Farm Sanctuary and a few other places as well. And I was so used to people waiting for top-down organizational campaigns to tell them what to do, like what action alert to sign or where to donate money. And I think that those things are important, but people were like, ready to do more, and they didn't really know what to do. So originally, we started it as a way to highlight activists who were involved in change making in any area, whether it was arts or legal activism or education or grassroots or, top roots, whatever. And the thing that they had in common was they were all creating change that was in many cases replicable and or scalable. So Mariann is absolutely a genius. Like, she to me is a luminary especially when it comes to animal law. She teaches animal law at Cornell, and currently, though, she's taught everywhere. And whenever I was around her, I was like, everyone needs to be around your brain. And like, what I'm good at is like getting a microphone and putting it in people's faces. That's probably my biggest skill. And so I was like, we need a podcast. That's how Our Hen House started. And it grew very, very quickly. And then we started also producing the animal law podcast. So we have been hosting the Our Hen House podcast every single week for almost 14 years. Yeah. So that's what Our Hen House is. And I love it very much. We have an incredible global collection of, we call them flock members. who are like our supporters and listeners, and we have get-togethers virtually, and so at the beginning of the get-together I'll say like, oh, who has something to share, and people all over the world raise their hand and share what's going on in their community, and that was exactly the type of hub we wanted our hen house to be.
Wow, that's so cool. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So I don't like, without underestimating, I was actually talking to Colleen Patrick Goudreau recently, who is a big animal activist also, and I asked her the same question, and she that I'm gonna ask you. And I asked her what's a good way for people who want to be more active, like they've become vegan, they're eating all plant-based, and now they want to take some action for the animals. And her answer was beautiful. It was like, don't underestimate, even just in your own immediate circle of friends and family, like just talking about it and leading by example is so meaningful and has such a huge impact. And I think that's excellent. That's a really great thing to point out. But let's say you've already gone vegan, and now and you wrote about this too, actually, in your book, about your mom and your grandmother as well, like starting to like jump on the train as well of educating people about animal activism and changing the way that they're eating and seeing the world. But let's say you're doing that, your immediate friends and family and the people around you are very well aware of what you're up to, and you're very vocal, but you still want to do more. You still feel like there's
Yeah.
more you can do, and you have no idea where to start. What advice or suggestion would you give someone if they wanted to become more active in working for the animals?
That's a great question, and I love the way you said Colleen answered it. That doesn't surprise me at all. She's so good at things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and in my second book, I wrote about this, The VegNews Guide to Being a Fabulous Vegan, which was food focused, but if you open it, you look, it's actually secretly not,
I
like
love it. I
I
love it.
get
You
into the
have
ethical issues. Yeah, that was snuck in there, and that was also padded with recipes, which you're welcome. I did not write the recipes because it would be like, here's how you make toast. I'm not a great cook. But the recipes were provided by VegNews, and I wrote the book. They provided the recipes. But so that actually is an example of how to use something that's sort of like fun and accessible and enjoyable as a way to bring up bigger discussions when that's possible. So the first answer I'll give is that there is no right or wrong way to advocate for animals. Like, I have no idea what works and what doesn't. I've talked to thousands and thousands of activists. I think that they're all doing what they can, and therefore they're doing an impeccable job. But what I would say to people, to kind of add on to what Colleen said, is look at what you're good at. Start there. I mentioned earlier I'm very good at thrusting the microphone in people's faces. I think elevating other people's narratives is the way that I create the most change. And that might be through interviewing them. It might be through helping them to get a book deal. It might be through like telling a reporter or a journalist or just a writer about someone else who they might be interested in their story. So like, that's what I'm doing. I have also interviewed artists who are, creating some game-changing art around animals, and then getting it into their local galleries, whether it's like an art gallery or it's like the town hub coffee shop that highlights an artist every now and then. And art is interesting, not just visual art, but also, performance art. And it's interesting because people look at it without that wall up that they might have if they're just being talked at.
Mm,
So, like, thinking creatively about ways to advocate is important. And I will also say, like, food is super important. Getting delicious food into people's mouths is probably the easiest way to create change. So that's my broad strokes answers. Like, start with what you're good at and do that.
I love it. I love what you said too about the art. That's so true. I didn't even think about that because it
Mhm.
really, it's not confrontational. People can feel like a conversation is very confrontational, even if you're just offering
Right.
information, but it's hard to be defensive against a piece of art.
Or writing, right? Like, personal narrative is, to me, one of the most important ways of creating change in a number of different social justice areas, certainly in animal protection as well.
Mhm.
So write about it, write about your personal transformation story. If you have the knack for media, think about ways to angle it that's appropriate for mainstream consumption, rather than writing an article called like animals are treated horribly behind closed doors. You might want to write something that's like a little bit more titillating. You won't believe what happened when I ditched meat. Dot dot dot. Like, obviously that's clickbaity, but maybe it's more likely that a publication would pick it up.
Yeah. For the longest time, I really felt like I had to shove things down people's throats. And then I backed way too far up of like, oh, I don't want to offend people and scare people away. And then you kind of come back and you realize like there's a palatable way of sharing things with people that might help them be more open to what you want to share with them. So it's not, because at first I was like, that's just pussyfooting around. I just need to get right to the point and tell them the truth. But it's like, but if you want them to hear the truth,
Right. Well,
sometimes,
and there are people who will be changed that way. It's few and far between. I think, speaking in I statements, and Colleen probably got into this, but like, speaking from personal experience rather than like, you should do this and you should do that. Like, oh, that's really interesting. When I went vegan, I noticed that I suddenly felt better about blah blah blah, or
yeah,
that kind of thing. If you're making it about yourself, people are going to be less likely
yeah,
to
definitely.
run away screaming.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I know for myself, it was really the blatant. I saw a documentary. I don't even know if the documentary was meant to unveil a reality or if it was just one of those cute, like, this is a farm. I don't remember because honestly, it was like 1988. But for some reason, I saw a video and it was really what was going on in a laying hen
Mhm.
factory. And I was traumatized. And then I was just like, that I'm done eating animals altogether. But the thing that happens for a lot of people is that they find, like, some of us get very inspired and we want to take action right away or make changes in our life, or even just go all the way and just start fighting for the rights of animals and all kinds of great stuff. But a lot of people also just get really, really discouraged and sad and literally traumatized and depressed when they learn these things. And like, do you have, I don't know if you have experience with that or if you were just like, I'm going to make change, or if you've experienced this feeling of like,
Mhm.
holy crap, what are we doing? And who are humans?
Yeah.
But do you have any suggestion for people who are feeling that way, who,
Right.
yeah,
So that's a great question, and of course I feel that. I felt that when I first went vegan, but I also feel it all the time in waves. I mean, I think that it's we have to shut it out to some extent in order to exist, on this planet. Like, or we're gonna go to the grocery store and start bawling.
yeah,
Like, so we have to we have to assimilate, and to straddle the line between that and knowing what's going on, it's a tall ask. Uh, so have self-compassion, first of all, but second of all, like, the Mr. Rogers line comes to mind, look for the helpers. I am extremely, extremely concerned, to say the absolute least, about where we're headed.
mhm,
And and I can't, like, be hopeless, because look at the people I talk to all the time, and they're just passionate and driven, and they care so deeply about creating change, that I just focus on that as much as I can. And when I'm in a lull, when I'm just sort of feeling like, don't they realize they are eating individuals? Like, when I am in that place, I have compassion for myself. I know it's going to pass. It's not going to pass permanently, but it's not going to be there permanently either. And have safe people you can speak to.
Yeah.
I'm sure your podcast does that for people who listen. I'm sure it provides a community and a safe space and like feeling understood. Our Hen House does as well. So hopefully you have people in your life, but listen to podcasts, listen to vegan musicians, even if they're not singing or playing about veganism per se, you just know like that there's that deeper kind of kinship that you could have with them.
Yeah, for sure. Find your people for sure. Um, oh gosh, we're almost out of time. Well, how do you have anything that you'd like to share with stuff that's going on with you right now or that you're up to?
Oh, sure. Well, okay. I mentioned that I am a host at WXXI, which is our NPR here. And it's been a real joy, like truly a dream to work in that capacity. And it comes with challenges as well. Like when I host the news shows, like I host Weekend Edition and I'm a fill-in host for Morning Edition and All Things Considered. And I'm also a fill-in host for the talk show called Connections. So when I'm doing the talk show, I have a bit more room to play. And I was able to do an episode about cultivated meat. I was able to do some environmental episodes as well. I'll always bring the animals in. I was able to do an episode about cats and a vegan called in, and like that was exciting. So I'll always bring it up whenever I can. And it's also it's a very progressive place to work, but like there are no other vegans besides me. So it's like a slap across the face of like, this is what you're dealing with, right? And I have to remain humble. There are things in this world that I know more about than they do, and there are a lot of things in this world that they know more about than I do. And so we have to sort of collaborate in that way and be approachable and so that's one thing I'm working on. My last book, The VegNews Guide to Being a Fabulous Vegan, came out in 2020. There's two other books that I'm currently trying to sell. So one is nonfiction and one is fiction. It would be my first.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm not quite there yet, but I'm hopefully at the end stages of a final edit. And we'll keep our fingers crossed for that because, of course, it's a secret vegan book. And it was so fun to create world build and create this universe of characters who are going through things that I hope are relatable. And other than that, I am a coach. I would say 99% of my clients are vegan. So it just so happens to have shook out that way. So it's mostly executive coaching regarding careers, regarding creative expression, more so than like your more general life coach. That's not exactly what I do.
Mhm.
It's more about like you have a professional goal and you kind of want accountability around it. And maybe in the process, we could undo some thinking that doesn't serve you anymore. So that's something else I do. I host the VegNews podcast, and Our Hen House is still going strong. So I get to host that. And that's maybe it, but I'm sure I'm forgetting a
I'm
career. Oh
sure
yeah.
there's
No, there is something else, but I won't get into it. Yeah. So I like
what?
to
Wait, what? No. What do you mean
well,
there's
oh no,
something
okay.
else?
So I work with my literary agent as a talent scout for identifying future authors. And unfortunately, and I'll just say this before people start emailing me, unfortunately, the main criteria for what I can bring to them is a massive following or like access to one.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't have a massive following, but when the VegNews book came out, it's because I was attached to the VegNews platform. So there are a lot of people who want to be writers. If you want to talk to me about that, definitely reach out. My name has no E. I'll add that. So it's Jasmin, Jasmin Singer, like in a band or in the shower, depending on your talent level. And there's a little coaching button there if people want to talk about writing. But as for headhunting, it's going to be challenging for your average person with like 100, 1,000, or 5,000 followers,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, that leads me to my last question, which is where can people get in touch with you or stay up to date about what you're up to?
Well, I also have a Substack, which is jasminsinger.substack.com. So Substack is a newsletter, so people can sign up for free for that. I also, jasminsinger.com will link to all of my social media, but I'm probably the most active on Instagram, which is Jasmin Singer Author. And tune into the Our Hen House podcast.
Yeah.
You could also listen to season 1 of the VegNews podcast if you'd like. We just wrapped season 1. We have not wrapped season 1 of Our Hen House. We're thinking making it like 14-year seasons and then like taking a month off. I'm just kidding. Like back when we started podcasting, there weren't really seasons. Like you just podcast. And so we're like, well, what do we do now? And obviously we create the rules. So we could be like, okay, we're taking time off, but we just don't do it. We just keep going. I don't know what's wrong with us. But join in on the fun. It's like activist focused. And the Animal Law podcast, by the way, is very, very accessible to non-lawyers as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's great. They're both great. Cool.
And thank you, Jennifer, for all that you're doing. You know, you're very easy to talk to. And I love that you did exactly what we said earlier, which is you were like, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm good at. This is how I can get my voice out there further. So well done.
Well, thank you so much. I know you're crazy, crazy busy, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It means a lot. And it was so nice meeting you and
so nice meeting you
in almost real life.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jasmin. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.